Hey, welcome back. I hope 2021 was a good year for you. The IRS has made some changes to the 2021 Form 1099 NEC. So we need to talk about the 1099 filing requirements, walk you through why you need to file, what the penalties are for not filing, and how you figure out who you need to send a 1099 to. So we'll get started on that shortly. Look forward to having you back. Okay, so 2021. We have our 1099 filing requirements, and there are two different forms for 1099s. There is a 1099 miscellaneous, MISC, and a 1099 NEC. Those two forms represent payments that you make from your trade or business to another for something. The IRS puts it on you to issue those 1099s to those vendors and then provide a copy of those 1099s to the IRS. The IRS processes that information and then holds those other taxpayers accountable for reporting all of the income that they have made. And so they're using this as an accountability. They provide penalties for your failure as a trade or business not to file those 1099s. And those penalties range from $50 per 1099 to over $400 per 1099, depending upon the egregiousness of your omission. So if you don't file those and completely ignore your requirement to file those, your penalty can be fairly substantial. So to remove that risk, you basically get those filing requirements handled, and your responsibility is to issue those 1099s to the vendors by January 31st. And then you're remitting those documents to the Internal Revenue Service on a red copy of those forms by January 31st as well. If you file them electronically, your filing deadline is a little bit extended. We won't go into that. Today we're going to be talking about those requirements, what makes up those requirements. So on screen here we've got our instructions for the 1099 miscellaneous NEC, where the IRS has combined both of those filing requirements into one set of instructions. On those instructions, it tells you the things that are required for your 1099 filing requirements. That's here. We're going to focus in because most of our small businesses have to deal with 1099 miscellaneous for our rent payments. There are other filing requirements for those 1099s we won't go into. They're listed here on screen. So beyond the 1099 miscellaneous, you have a 1099 NEC. That stands for non-employee compensation. Basically, it's when you pay somebody more than $600 for services, you have to determine whether you're required to send a 1099 or not. So the 1099 NEC instructions start on page 7 of the instruction manual and essentially walk you through what those requirements are. What we've done is taken those instructions and put them into a flowchart, if you will, to help you determine whether or not you need to issue a 1099 to that person. So obviously you're here because you're in a trade or business. Nonprofits, churches, etc. are considered to be in a trade or business for these reporting requirements. When you pay somebody more than $600 for services, including parts and materials, you move down the flowchart in the yes box. If you paid that person by check, cash, or you bartered for those services, then you move down the yes box as well. If you paid an attorney for services to represent you, you're required to issue a 1099 to them regardless of their entity type. As we move down the flowchart, we have to determine what kind of entity was paid. If it was a sole proprietor, or if that entity, that person that you paid, is reporting to the IRS as a sole proprietor, as a partnership, a single member LLC, or a trust, then you're required to issue a 1099 NEC to that entity. If, on the other hand, that entity who you're paying is reporting to the IRS as a corporation or as an S corporation, you're not required to send a 1099 NEC. It's one of those questions that there's nothing that precludes you from issuing a 1099 to those folks, but you're not required to if that's how they report. So you ask the next question, well, how do I know how they're going to report? Well, that information comes when you ask the person you are paying to send you a W-9. That W-9 is something you send to the vendor. The vendor then completes that form and sends it back to you. So the W-9, they fill out their name, their business name, and then they tell you in box 3 how they report to the Internal Revenue Service, their federal tax classification. They'll either be an individual, a sole proprietor, single member LLC, a C corporation, an S corporation, a partnership, or trust and estate. In the event that they're a limited liability company, they also indicate their tax classification as to whether they're a C corporation, S corporation, or partnership. That's going to be a multi-member LLC typically, but it could also be a single member LLC that's elected to be treated as an S corporation or C corporation. So this is where you know what kind of entity they are so that you know how you're supposed to report your 1099s. In addition, they provide you their addresses, and at the bottom they list either their social security number or their federal ID number, and then they'll sign and date that document. It's important that you have these documents for all the vendors that you pay on file to avoid any failure to file penalties from the IRS. If your vendor has given you this and completed it improperly or incorrectly, you can't be held accountable for not issuing that 1099 if that person said that they were a corporation or an S corporation. So that's an important document for you to have. Now is the time to be gathering those, because your deadline for filing those 1099 NECs is January 31st. So you don't want to be at the last minute trying to gather this information. So let's go back to the 1099 miscellaneous filing requirements. So our 1099 miscellaneous filing requirements are basically the same concept if we're paying somebody more than $600 for rent or one of those other items that was listed in the instructions we showed you earlier, and that entity is reporting as a sole proprietor, partnership, LLC, or trust, then you're required to issue that 1099 miscellaneous to that company. In the event that they're reporting as a corporation or S corporation, you're technically not required to issue the 1099 miscellaneous. Again, it doesn't preclude you from issuing one anyway. That's up to you as to how you do that. So those are the two different 1099 filing requirements, the deadlines for those, and the penalties related to those 1099s. We're going to put together another video following this that shows you how to get QuickBooks 2021 to work with you and actually prepare those 1099s. So look forward to having you back. Thanks so much. Have a great year.